Hello and welcome to Keep Talking, a community dialogue about mental health. My name is Gay Maxwell and I'm the manager of the Office of Continuing Education at the Brattleboro Retreat. The Brattleboro Retreat is a very old, almost 185-year-old psychiatric and addictions treatment hospital in southeastern Vermont. It serves children, adolescents, and adults in inpatient and outpatient and residential programs. The Brattleboro Retreat provides care and courage when being human hurts. Today I am thrilled to have as our guest Dr. Paula Butterfield. Dr. Butterfield joins us again from Columbus, Ohio, where she flew from today. She's been a speaker at the Office of Continuing Education several times, and tomorrow she'll be presenting a program to mental health clinicians from all over New England who want to hear her seminar on how to work and live with high conflict people. Dr. Butterfield is a former counseling psychologist. She now flies around the country offering seminars to healthcare professionals who want to learn more on optimal functioning. And she also has an active practice as a coach to executives and teams in all sectors of the economy. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so thrilled that you're here today.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here, Gay. Thank you.
And I thought that the studio audience at BCTV might be interested also in the subject of high conflict people. All of us at some point or other, or most of us perhaps, have gone to work with a sense of dread, even come home with a sense of dread because we work or live with someone who's unpredictable, someone who we walk around as if a landmine might go off at any moment and we might deal with an explosion. So is that a fair description of a high conflict person?
Well, that's certainly an indicator that the relationship I'm in may be with somebody whom we would consider a high conflict individual. Yeah, those feelings of dread, I don't know what to expect, I need to walk on eggshells, and usually that's tied to, on the other end, some explosive outbursts. They're right in your face, or they go the other direction and completely shut you down. The reaction's kind of out of proportion to what would seem normal in everyday circumstances.
What characteristics of the high conflict person might make us sit up and take notice?
That's a great question. There are several things. These people tend to be really negative. It's almost a palpable negativity about them. We all are negative to some degree, but these are the people who say, "Oh, we tried that 15 years ago and it didn't work then. It's not going to work now." Just really real negativity and very black-white thinking. You always do this, or you never do that. Mm-hmm. That thinking and that negativity often underlies a lot of poor judgment decisions and a lot of impulse control problems. So I might say something to a high conflict individual that is not a big deal in my world, and they really react very strongly and very negatively, or make an innocent mistake, and the next thing I know, have a huge argument. That's where the walking on eggshells comes from. Mm-hmm. A couple of other characteristics: these people can't take somebody else's perspective, so it's real tough for them to empathize. And they don't typically learn from experience.
What does it mean to empathize? Maybe
they're not able to appreciate that somebody else has a different experience, and to kind of imagine what that experience might be like, to have a sense of how the other person might feel. Mm-hmm. So they're just very much locked into their own perspective, and they assume that everybody else feels the same way they do, and if they don't, they should. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So and behaviors. You had said before, kind of the in-your-face behavior. Are there other things?
There are others. These people tend to be defensive blamers. It's always somebody else's fault. And it's tied to that very narrow perspective that they take. Their emotional responses are often way out of proportion to the situation, and that happens when they get information that doesn't check with how they see themselves. So they'll overreact in those situations, and usually get in very defensive ways.
And if you were to characterize, let's say, the relationship, the high conflict relationship, what does that look like?
Well, that depends. Now we're getting into some of the complexity of this. If I find joy in most of my relationships, I have a lot of strong relationships, but I have a boss or one person in the family whom I think is really high conflict, then I've probably gotten into a relationship with someone who has a long history. This clearly is the other person's kind of baggage, if you will. But if I find that I have a pattern of always being in relationships where that turn sour, and that people always seem to be against me rather than with me, then either one of two things is probably going on. There's something in me that needs that conflict, or I might even be the source of it without realizing it.
Oh, I see.
Which is another characteristic of these individuals. They typically they don't see how, they can't understand the impact that they have on other people.
So you're saying that if someone has a lot of different relationships in their lives, relationships that where there's give and take, and those relationships are more or less a flowing kind of relationship where they're, again, the give and take.
Yeah, and satisfying
relationships. And there happens to be one person in the picture that just, for some reason, the sparks just go. It may not be that person is high conflict. But if you're someone who constantly finds themselves in relationships that are dissatisfying, they may have an issue with getting along with people.
Yes, they may have an issue getting along with people, and they may be attracted to high conflict people because there's some role that they're accustomed to that they may not even be aware of, like being the victim.
Well, one of the things I was going to ask you is, I imagine a lot of people who might be watching this would be saying, well, there are a lot of people that I feel, that I'm in relationships that I feel irritated by, and maybe angry. I mean, you can't live with somebody without feeling irritated.
Sure.
I mean, does that mean I'm in a high conflict relationship? Is that person is everybody high conflict?
That's a great question, and what we're talking about here, I think, is one of degree. Conflict is normal. In fact, in my world, conflict and differences in relationships is pretty healthy. But let's go back to what you described earlier. Do I feel like I have to walk on eggshells? Am I afraid that if I say something, I'm going to trigger some unpredictable and really intense response in the other person? That's a high conflict relationship.
And I can imagine that produces a tremendous amount of stress.
Absolutely. Physically, it's very stressful.
And how does the body tend to, I mean, does it manifest in the body in some way?
Well, let's say you and I are in a relationship and I feel like I need to walk on eggshells around you. I walk in the door and I can tell from the look on your face maybe that you're upset, and I get scared. I get a bunch of stress hormones dumped into my bloodstream, and they do a whole bunch of things, but one of the things they do is really influence how I think and how I behave. They make it very hard for me to think clearly because I'm afraid. And that fear keeps me from being able to think clearly and to act in ways that I would normally act if I weren't feeling like I just really have to be careful here.
You may have covered this a little bit before, but I'll go back to it. Are the people we attracted to, I mean, the people that find themselves in high conflict relationships, is it something about the moth to the flame? Is it, are there certain people that are just attracted to high conflict people, or is it just something that we back ourselves into?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said earlier. If there are isolated instances of people who feel pretty toxic to me, it's probably just normal human nature. I've just run into some people, some individuals who, were just nails on the chalkboard to one another. But the real important question is, what's the pattern? What's the pattern over time? Because high conflict individuals have patterns of really poor relationships and broken relationships and lots of problems with intimacy and getting close and sustaining a long-term relationship. So is that my pattern?
So if you go out on a date with somebody that tells you all about all the terrible partners they had in the past, maybe that's a red flag.
That would be a red flag in my world, certainly. I would be listening up on that one, yes.
So is it worth asking the question, why me? Why does this keep happening to me? Why do I have this person in my life?
I think it is worth asking that question, but maybe not for the reason that you might be thinking. In my experience, the only person whose behavior I can change is my own. The person whose face I see in the bathroom mirror every day. And if I'm not aware of how I'm being pulled into patterns like this, or if I'm not aware how my behavior is contributing, then I'm kind of dead in the water. I don't have any options. But as soon as I become aware of either how I'm getting hooked or how my view of the world is contributing to the situations I find myself in, now I have something that I can do something about. Because I can change. I can't change the other person's behavior, but I can change my own, and I can change how I think about the situation. I can change my story about the situation.
So what are the things that, for instance, you coach people on in terms of changing? I mean, say you have a boss and you need your job, and you just this happens to be a high conflict person, and you're trying to support your family. You don't want to change your job right now, but you've got to work around this person. What are the things that you advise?
Let me make a distinction here. There are the short-term tactical things that I coach people on, and then there are longer-term strategies. So in terms of tactics, typically when a high conflict person is triggered, when we see that strong emotional reaction, it's because some fear they have has been triggered. And in that moment, there are two things we can do. I tell clients, first of all, find a way to stay relaxed in the moment. It sounds really easy.
I was about to say.
It's really hard. I tell people, find your feet. Real quick, find your feet. It forces them to drop out of their heads and out of their thinking and down. They can ground their bodies, and then take a couple of deep belly breaths, That literally will begin to change their body chemistry, and it will help them stay calm. The other thing they can do when the high conflict person gets triggered is respond with what we call ear. Empathy. Gee, this is really upsetting to you. I can see that. I can see how upsetting this is. Attention, you give them your full attention. You don't try to defend, you don't try to do anything, but give them your undivided attention. And the R is for respect. Be very respectful in your communication with them. What that does is help them calm down. So find your feet, couple of deep belly breaths, and practice empathy, attention, respect. Use your ear. And that's a way to diffuse a situation in the moment. Now, in terms of does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. I'm just trying to remember the ear part.
Yeah, use our ear.
Use your ear.
In terms of longer term strategies, if this is somebody I'm working with long-term, if somebody I'm married to, then we need longer-term strategies. I typically have people start with getting very clear about what's most important to you. Most of us are experts in what we don't want. We have years of knowing, I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't want this. But we don't live in a society that really encourages us to think seriously about what matters most deeply to me. What do I want my work life to be like? What do I want my relationships at home to be like? And I actually have people start there, get really clear about what do I value most, what's most important to me, because the clearer they are about what they want their life to be like and who and how they want to be, the greater the likelihood that they will find their path there. When we're working to get rid of something we don't want, it takes us in a much different direction, and it's going to produce much different results than if we know this is what I want this relationship to be like.
Could you give an example, perhaps, of someone you might have worked with that, in terms of them discovering what they did like or did want in their lives?
Oh, gee, one example. Yes, this is a work situation. I was working with an executive who had a highly unpredictable senior vice president that she didn't report to, but he was continually coming into her department, yelling at her people. And he was a high conflict guy, and he was pretty out of control, and nobody wanted to deal with him. Everybody this happened to be a healthcare system, everybody in the organization knew that he was kind of out of control.
But he had a lot of power,
he
probably.
He had a lot of power. He intimidated people. He bullied them. And so she got very clear about what she wanted for her team. She wanted her team to have the space to make mistakes, to try to experiment with things. She had a whole list of how she wanted her team to operate. And once she was clear on that, then we stepped back and said, okay, now what kind of limits do you need to draw with him in order to create and sustain this kind of a relationship, a working environment for your team? And as soon as she knew what it was she wanted, she was able to say, oh, well, I guess I just have to tell him if he comes in and confronts one of my people again, I will challenge him on it, and if he does it a second time, I will write him up. Now, part of what we're talking about here is the importance of saying, here's the limit, mm-hmm. but also saying, and here's what I'll do when you cross that limit.
Mm-hmm. Do you have certain tools that you offer to folks to try to see if it opens up that serenity a bit?
I have some tools that I use. I also have some websites that I refer people to. Mm-hmm. But I typically start by just having them identify who and how do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to be known as? You want to be known as a person of courage? Then every time you're afraid, it's a chance to be courageous. Do you want to be known as somebody who's tolerant? Then every time this person goes off on you, it's a chance to practice being tolerant. Not letting the person run over you, but being open-minded and tolerant and realize this is his problem, it's not mine.
So one of the things that we probably should note is that this, when it comes to the point where the conflict is a kind of terrorizing conflict and bordering on violence, that's different, isn't it?
That's a whole different ballgame. That's a whole different ballgame. In any relationship, in my world, Gay, in any relationship, safety is number one. And if someone is feeling threatened physically, if someone is feeling terrorized emotionally or psychologically, they need to contact a professional right away, preferably somebody who has experience either in domestic violence, if this is a home situation, or in workplace violence, if this is something unfolding at work. They need to report it to the appropriate authorities, and they need to develop a safety plan for themselves. Mm-hmm. Yes, safety is right at the top. Yes. So I see those situations way out there at the edges, and what I was talking about earlier falls more within the bell curve.
Yes. Do you see times when people decide that they're going to leave their jobs, or they're going to, leave their marriages, or do you see that happening as well?
I do. In fact, when I first started in business, 70% of my clients left their jobs. 70% of the clients I had in the first 2 years left their jobs. And I thought for a while, is it me? But part of what I realized is that they were very unhappy for myriad reasons. They were very unhappy in their positions. And once they shifted their focus from what I don't want and what I don't like to imagining and beginning to create define the life they wanted for themselves, they found the courage to move forward. And they began attracting people into their lives who supported whatever it was that they were going for. So yes, I've found that that notion of focusing on what matters most deeply to me is really powerful. That's spirit, that's heart. I mean, that's...
What websites do you suggest to people?
There's a woman named Byron Katie. Are you familiar with her
I've
work?
Heard of her.
Yeah,
yes.
And she has something called The Work. It's I think the website is actually called thework.com, and
we'll look it up, and we probably can post it right on the
worksheets are available
yes.
right on the website.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great one. That's where I would start.
Great. I had a couple questions that, oh, wait a minute, I didn't ask you about neuroscience. I know you're going to talk about neuroscience tomorrow, and how this has helped you work with folks, neuroscience being the study of the brain, and what we know about the brain has changed so much, probably in the last 20 years. And how do you use that, what you've learned about that, as a tool to help people?
Great question, and that's something I could talk about for hours. So let me see if I can give you a nutshell. I mentioned earlier about how stressful it is to be in a situation like this. We know from lots of good, sound research, neuroscience research now, how all of the different ways that stress affects us physically. It disrupts our health, it messes with our immune system functioning. It actually can, in extreme situations, lead to the loss of brain cells. It puts people at risk for depression and for anxiety attacks, that sort of thing. So one of the corollaries that goes along with that is that if we can learn to practice staying calm, find my feet, we actually shift our brain chemistry. We can turn on hormones that calm the body and that relax us. And the more grounded we stay, the more access we have to our self-control centers. So now I can actually choose how I want to respond to you rather than just react, just knee-jerk react. We also know that one of the things that I coach people in a lot is actively practicing and nurturing positive feelings. This isn't Pollyanna thinking. This isn't just positive thinking. It's tied to nurturing positive emotions like joy and wonder and curiosity and gratitude. Kindness practices are a great way to do this. What we know from about 15 years of neuroscience research now is that when we do that, we actually are like recharging our psychological battery.
What does it look like to practice joy?
it's going to vary from person to person. For me, if I try to pay close attention to what's going on in the little backyard behind my house. For me to find the first ladybug of the season, that is a joyful moment. When the first hummingbird shows up at the feeder, I just stop and watch.
So it's really noticing being in the moment.
It's noticing being in the moment. It's, for some people, it's reflecting on time spent with people they love. It could be a favorite place. But joy it's expansive, and it's something that fills us up.
Great. That sounds very doable if you're just conscious about it.
Yes, and that's what it takes. I tell people the hardest part of this work is remembering to do it.
Yes.
Because we get pulled to the negative.
I have a question for you. I have a friend, my friend asked me to ask you this question. And so this is kind of a Dear Abby moment, all right?
Okay.
So Dan said, I asked him what he would ask if he had a chance to talk to an expert in high conflict. He says, I am able to reason that I can't change another person's behavior and that their behavior is about them and not me. But what can I actively do in the moment to diffuse my own fight response? I need to formulate action plans that I can do in those moments and alternatives, so if plan A fails, I can pull out plan B. Now, you talked about grounding your feet.
That's, I think, the single most powerful exercise somebody can practice. I use Find Your Feet because it forces us out of our heads. When we're in our heads, we're worried about what's going to happen next, or we're thinking about all the things in the past that have happened, so we're fueling our own cycle. Mm-hmm. But the body only knows one time frame, right now. So when I find my feet, I force myself to come, oh, there's the floor, okay. That's a grounding process. And that, combined with one or two good deep belly breaths, a little longer than that, I know we're a little short on time here, are the best practices in the world, because it creates just a little space within which I can say, do I want to go ahead and scream and yell at this person, or do I want to practice being the kind of person I decided I want to be?
Well, Paula, thank you so much for doing this program.
Oh, thank you.
It's so generous of you to give your time, because
I'm thrilled.
I know you're a very busy person, but this is really exciting for the Brattleboro retreat.
Well, and
so
this is a really common situation. So I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula. And thank you for joining us today on Keep Talking. I hope you'll come back for another episode. I want to thank BCTV. BCTV co-produces this program, and we couldn't do it without them. And so I'll look forward to seeing you again. Join us again on Keep Talking.